Thank you all for joining us. I believe we are still having participants joining in from all over the country. All right, let's get started. So this is a continuation of our series of discussions that we have been having about innovation, about creating your own organizations. And this series of talks is sponsored by the Atal Incubation Center at Dayanand Sagar University, which is one of the premier incubation centers for student ideas across the country, right? We have been doing this series of talk on the first Friday of every month for a while now. And today's topic, what we will be discussing in more detail, is about the impact of large language models like ChatGPT on research and innovation. So far, the previous discussions have been a little bit on the theory side. We have discussed about the strategies and pricing strategies, business models, all of that. Today's session is more of a workshop where we will look at what are the capabilities of a platform like this, right? What does it mean for aggregating information from various places, and how does it impact our ability to consolidate information in the form of doing research and taking that research forward into solving real life problems through innovative solutions to those problems, right? So let's get started on that. So first thing I wanted to talk about was research itself, right? And research is, if we get back into the question of what really is research, right? How do we go about doing research, right? One question that, one thing that we can all agree on is the purpose of doing research is to be able to produce new knowledge, right? When we are producing this knowledge, there is an inherent process that is involved. There are several ways in which we collect information. There are several ways in which we process that information. We document that information, right? These are all activities that essentially create new knowledge for society to use, right? And in many cases, the new knowledge that is produced is also monetizable as a company, right? It creates intellectual property, right? And this new knowledge that is getting created, it kind of works on the previous layers, right? So whether it is that we are able to create large data sets where, which is new, which is not available before the particular scenario. For example, we have now sent up the James Webb telescope in space, right? So that is collecting a lot of data, right? It's a humongous amounts of data that is being collected by this, by this telescope, and all that data needs to be processed, right? So that is also new knowledge, right? We have been building a lot of information processing systems to manage that data, right? We have been looking at, if you have used a spreadsheet, right? If you have used, any of your programming languages, they essentially, the purpose of those tools is to be able to crunch all that data into usable information, right? When we talk about knowledge, I think knowledge kind of adds on to that information, right? Knowledge is something where we see a summarization of the information that has been collected so far, right? And more and more what we are seeing is the country graduating towards a knowledge-based economy, right? We have had IT-based companies, but nowadays what you are seeing is a lot of companies which are focusing on data analytics, which are focusing on AI, right? So these are all essentially knowledge-based organizations, right? And when you create new knowledge, it comes out as various artifacts, right? So the outcome of creating new knowledge could be in the form of a book, right? You could be writing a book about something. You could be writing a paper or a blog about something. And remember, writing a paper or even a blog is can become a commercial activity, right? You could become an active blogger looking at creating new knowledge and new content, which is monetized by advertising that particular blog, right? Because there are people who are coming to visit your blog regularly. Same with books, right? They are monetizable artifacts because people will buy those books, right? And that's how the knowledge creators are incentivized to create these knowledge artifacts, right? In many cases, you could be creating a prototype out of your with your knowledge, right? And it could be a new robotic arm, it could be a new algorithm, it could even be a 3D model, right? There are multiple ways to create these prototypes, and essentially creating a minimum viable prototype may actually get you funding for extending that into a full-fledged product, right? Uh, Databases are another, is another very very important knowledge artifact that we tend to underestimate. Right, there are several companies which are whose entire business model is based on being able to collate databases. Right, of this could be company details, this could be categorization of companies. Right, so there are organizations whose entire intellectual property and its knowledge base is based on being able to create these structured databases, right? Similarly, if you are even categorizing images in terms of the objects that you see in a particular image, right? That data set is also monetizable, right? So knowledge artifacts in the form of databases are definitely a monetizable activity, right? Same goes with visualizations, or with being able to organize a workshop or a course on a subject matter of your expertise, right? So these are all art, tangible forms of knowledge, which each have their own revenue model. Each of them have the potential to be monetized, right? So essentially, what I'm trying to say over here is that research creates new knowledge, right? Uh, just a little wordplay over here, because we are using the word research itself. For those of you who are geeks of computer science, I'll just put a search star on top of that, because you're searching something over and over again, right? You're creating that new, right? The moment you're creating new knowledge, you are building on top of something that exists. And if you are building on top of something that exists, then you need to know how to go about and look for what is available out there, right? For those of you who are a little older, you might have, if you had to know about something, if you had to know about a particular topic, what were your options, right? The first option that you essentially had was to be able to go to a library, right? You could go to a library and look up books on a particular subject, right? You walk into a library, you could meet an archivist, you could meet a librarian, you could look up the index cards, identify where that book is on the rack, right? Go look up that particular shelf, and find that book, right? Or those of you who are doing your active research over the past 10-15 years, you've all grown up being very very used to something like a Google, right? Where you can generally go in, search for a keyword, right? Google itself is integrated with various digital libraries, so you can go to scholar.google, or patents, the patent subdomain under Google, right? So you could look up information sources around that, or you could look up credible sources of information like Wikipedia, right? Or it could be a blog or some content that has been created by someone, right? So those were the typical ways of searching for information. And this is where there is a disruption that is coming in the form of these large language models, right? Of course, the most popular and the most talked about one right now is perhaps ChatGPT. So we will take a deeper look in terms of what its capabilities are, and how does the searching process change when you work with something like a chat GPT versus when you work with a Google, right? Essentially, the fundamental shift that is happening, right, is that when you search for Google on Google, you get a list of ranked websites to visit, right? And Google is very, very generous, and it will definitely go out there and say that here are 10,000 sites about your about the search term that you are asking for, but very, very unlikely that you are going to go in and look at all those 10,000 sites, right? So you may be just looking at the top, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 at most results that are coming up, and creating a summary of that information in your own head, right, in your own thought process. With large language models, the natural capability, the ability to process that kind of information is significantly improved, right? Therefore, rather than going through multiple sites, there is a process of information democratization where you can get a gist of the information very, very quickly, right? So that kind of augments your natural thought process and helps you create summaries really, really quickly, get an overview of the research topic or the market scenario, right? These are things where you can get a quick snapshot of what's going on before you decide to pursue that more deeply, right? Which would require more formal sources of information, right? But think of it as a mechanism that allows you to run a quick approximation very, very quickly, of course, right? These are all AI-driven systems. Therefore, it is not an exhaustive result. It's not a summary of all the information that is available out there, right? But these AI algorithms, they have, they take a heuristic view of the world, right? But even as human beings, you have to understand that when we make a decision, it is very unlikely that we make a decision with the complete knowledge, right? We also make decisions knowing only partial information, right? So with that, I will stop my presentation perhaps and probably look at seeing what does this chat GPT is all about, right? So the first thing that you'll notice is I have gone to the ChatGPT website, right, which is chat.openai.com, right, and I've logged in. And the first thing that I want to do, and I've just kind of ranked a lot of searches in terms of the complexity of the process itself, right? So perhaps the quickest thing that we can do is ask it some quick fact-checking questions, right? For example, I've asked ChatGPT about the Dayanand Sagar University Innovation Foundation, right? And it's given me a synopsis of what the Dayanand Sagar University Innovation Foundation is all about, right? If I were to ask Google for the same information, I have another tab where I have Google open. So I find with Google is it's given me the right pointer, right? It's pointing me directly into the website of the organization itself, right? And it's got a little card on the side that is picked up from Wikipedia. So it's got a citation of where this information has come from, right? And it's giving me a bunch of links that I can decide to pursue, right? But if I'm in for a quick search, I may not really be interested in all this information. So first thing that you will notice is that you do not get tired as much when you are processing information in this with ChatGPT, right? What else could I ask for, right? Since we are talking about ChatGPT today, why don't I ask it about large language models, right? So I can ask it a question like, what is a large language model? you notice that it is starting to give me an answer, right? It is starting to give me an answer, and the answer that it has given me, it's a very reasonable answer. It's not a very, the language that is used is not very complicated over here, right? So it is meant for a general purpose consumption, right? So it starts to give me a response, a very informed response, right? And a quick summary of what large language models are all about, right? So as a quick fact finding, as a quick fact check, I can probably use this, right? If there is a well-known truth about a particular topic, I can ask ChatGPT about it, right? Now, fundamentally, the way ChatGPT works, right? It's not a human there, right? It's not a human who is thinking about what to respond to you. It is a neural network that has been trained on a lot of data, right? Primarily, these data sources have come from large trusted databases like Wikipedia, like Google Patents, right? So it's taken a lot of its information from legal websites, right? From various kinds of blogs, right? So that's what constitutes its knowledge base, so as to say, right? And it is answering based on that. The ChatGPT algorithm uses something called a transformer algorithm, and part of what the transformer algorithm really does is that it essentially tries to find, given a sequence of words, given the last word, it tries to find the next word which would have the highest probability of occurring in its knowledge base, right? And it does some permutation on a little bit of permutation on top of that, right? So that the responses are not the same, are not deterministic every time, right? So it's almost like monkey typing. It's almost like it's predicting that given its large knowledge base that it has looked into, what was the most likely word that followed the word that was given out last, right? So that's how it keeps on adding new words, and then there's a cutoff in terms of what can be maximum sentence lengths, right? But given that it has been trained on a very large data sets, and that's why they are called large language models, right? The likelihood of it being meaningful is actually much higher, right? But there is nobody who's sitting out there trying to create an answer for you, right? So we have to query, we have to ask ChatGPT essentially nicely, right? And kind of coax out various kinds of results from it, right? So what else can we get out of it, right? So let me ask it about what is the history of LLMs, right? And you see that the answer is still not bad, right? The answer is contextual. When I asked about the history of LLMs, right, it has the word LLM in its context already, because I had asked that question previously, right? So it is using that context information essentially to be able to respond to my next question. Right? And it gives me a pretty cohesive answer. It gives me a 4-paragraph answer where it's brought out some since I've asked for history, it's brought out some context from the 1980s, 1990s, right? Looking into the paper that founded a lot of this, right? Came out in 2013, right? The next thing that I can do with ChatGPT now is I can now start probing it a lot more, right? So what I can do is perhaps I can ask it what were the major papers right? So my query again is a very natural language query. And essentially it gives me enough information to start understanding this area a little bit more, right? So it's given me a chunk of information which is relevant, right? There are many papers, but it's kind of highlighted the top few. I wouldn't say the top few papers, but it's given me a starting point, right? If I were to ask the same question to Google, what I would get, apart from the sponsored results, right? Essentially, I would get redirections, and I would have to process this information to be able to understand which are the which are the main papers to start looking in this particular area with, right? So that's the major difference that you will observe, right? The next part I want to cover is probably ChatGPT's capability to kind of summarize information, right? So I look at this information and I have a starting point. There are 5 papers that have been written about large language models, right? I am particularly fascinated by Ashish Vaswani's paper, right? So let me understand a little bit more about it. So I can say, give me details about and here I can start to play around a little bit. I do not have to be as formal in terms of my specifications, right? So I can say, give me details about the Vaswani paper. So it's starting to tell me that what is this paper about, right? If I wanted to look at this paper alternatively, right, I can go up on Google. I know the name of the paper, so since I already know that this is the paper that I'm interested in, and if I wanted to read this paper in more detail, I can definitely go up to Google and perhaps download the paper. And try to read it myself. And if I wanted to get into that level of detail so early on in my exploration, right, I could go ahead and do that, right? But chances are when you are exploring a new area, you are generally trying to get an overview of what is going on rather than getting into the details itself, right? So rather than going into the paper itself, I might want to understand a summary of that paper, right? Again, notice that I am able to use a lot of pronouns. I'm able to, when I say that, can you summarize the paper, it understands which paper I am referring to. So I'm just going to let it finish that, right? Now, It's possible. I mean, it's giving us a nice summary, right? It's giving us a short summary of that of the entire paper, right? It's not getting into the nitty gritties, but I think that is sufficient, right? We could also go into the paper and look at the abstract, right? So that is another way of finding out the summary. But suppose I am not a native speaker of English, right? If I'm not a native speaker of English, right, then the technical jargon may be a little bit too difficult for me to comprehend as well, right? So this is where another capability of ChatGPT comes into the foreground, right, where I can ask it to translate a summary to, my mother tongue is Bengali, right? So I can ask it to translate it to Bengali. And the translations that are coming out are actually not that bad, right? Of course, I could use essentially a Google Translate, right, to be able to translate out copy the abstract, translate that into using Google Translate or a similar kind of an app, right? Do a cross translation to verify if the translations are coming out correctly or not, right? But this is fun, right? This is a lot more already. What you are seeing is a lot of capabilities that are already kind of integrated into ChatGPT itself, right? So it's kind of becoming a one point mechanism in order to explore and create new knowledge, right? So we can continue with this, but for the sake of, I think we get the point over here, right? That you can use it to do translations, right? Just by asking it to translate. In many cases, when you are working with ChatGPT, right, it is important to be able to structure your questions such that there is a possible response for ChatGPT to give. There now, remember, there is always a lot of fail safes and a lot of safety mechanisms that are built within ChatGPT itself, right, to prevent its misuse, right? But when we are looking for specific information, right, just like you would, we have a formal syntax like SQL, which we use to get data from a database, right? You can use what I call is unstructured query language, essentially, right, to be able to prompt ChatGPT for answers that are more relevant to you. So we can go ahead and we can do this translation mechanisms, right? What else can we do? One of the key capabilities for ChatGPT, and this is also prevalent in current search mechanisms, is to be able to understand citations, right? So if we understand that this particular paper by Vaswani was written in 2017, right? So if this was written in 2017, I can ask what are the major papers that cite this paper, right? Again, I'm purposefully using a lot of pronouns over here. Now remember, with something like a Google search, right, it is relatively easier. Every paper carries a list of citations, right? So it is easy to find out which are the papers that are referenced by a particular paper, right? But doing a backward search, right, understanding which papers have referenced this particular paper is a much harder task. Google does that all the time, right? It's fine. It identifies backlinks and creates its entire ranking algorithm is based on that, but it is computationally intensive. So ChatGPT can solve a lot of these computationally intensive problems as well, right? Which is a backward citation or a backward reference check, right? So not only can I have information like this, I can actually get it to have a lot of formatting done for me as well, right? For example, if I do not want, I think that's probably one of the next capabilities of ChatGPT that I wanted to demonstrate, that it can help you format a lot of text really quickly, right? So, for example, if I have this information and I want to export this information out onto an Excel sheet, right? I can say that give me the information as a table with a column for the year of publication. So it's giving me the same information back. If I wanted to use it in an Excel file or in a similar format, right? I can get it to make a table for me. Not only this, I mean, those of you who are writing papers, right, when you are managing the bibliography of a particular paper, it is extremely frustrating to be able to format the paper names, right? So I can also ask it about, say, give me the citation of the Vaswani paper in, say, APA and IEEE formats. Right, so it knows what the format exactly is, and it is going to give me the format, give me the response in that particular format, right? Now, this is the functionality that is available with Google as well, right? So if I were to go in you'll find that there is this citation information is also available out of Google as well, right? So there is a lot of similarity. There's a lot of other software that allows you to manage that, but then there are, again, these are multiple softwares that you have to integrate with, right? Here, if you come across a one-off usage, you can definitely go ahead and use ChatGPT to be able to format your text, or you could give it a paper and say, please format this paper, the bibliography for me, right? So it's got this capability with being able to do these formattings, right? The other thing that it can do is do these keyword extractions, right? So we had earlier talked about the summary of the paper itself, right? So perhaps I'm not too excited about the summary. I wanted to understand it in a little bit more detail, right? So I can ask it to reprint the and it's got this capability to be able to recollect information that was generated previously. So it's created this summary, but perhaps I'm not too happy with this summary. Perhaps I wanted a little bit more of a expanded scope of this summary, right? So I can actually go ahead and expand the scope of this summary, right? So I can just ask it, expand the summary technically, for lack of a better word, right? So you see that the quality of response, right? The quality of response has evolved. Quality of response now, this is probably a response that is geared more towards somebody who is already a subject matter expert, or somebody at a college level, right? Whereas the previous answer was created for a layman, right? Somebody who's not very familiar with the terms of this particular paper. So perhaps what I can ask it now, since it has created a more expanded summary, I can definitely look for what are the keywords that are over there, right? So maybe I can ask it to list the computer science concepts are introduced in the expanded summary. So very quickly now, what I can do is, even without going into the paper, I get a sense of what are the key elements of this particular paper, what are the key concepts that are going to be introduced, right? So that is definitely a good plus, because it saves a lot of bandwidth when you are processing through large public reports, right? What is the summary that you should be aware of, right? So it helps you reduce that time significantly. Right. Let's look at grouping. I mean, I think I missed out on this part a little bit, right? We were originally discussing about who were the people wrote these, the group of papers, around Vaswani's paper, right? And they were written around 2018, 2019. Let me build upon this thought a little bit more, right? So I already had this table of papers which were written about Vaswani's paper, right? There's a little bit of a confusion in my presentation, so I'm just going to look at it slightly differently and probably come at it from the compare side, right? How can I now use ChatGPT to compare information, right? So I have a list of I have a table with all the papers that are not all the papers, some of the major papers affiliated, which had cited Vaswani's paper. So let me just reprint the table. And instead of just reprinting it, let me also say reprint the table. Yeah, add a column and their affiliations. Right. So not only I get to know about this paper, let me resubmit. It's given me a more expanded table this time around. Let's me ask it to reprint the first 5 papers with the with columns for the authors and their affiliated and their affiliations. Let's ask that. Right, I'm asking for the 5 just to keep the response shorter. Right. So perhaps if I'm not really interested about the paper itself, but maybe I wanted to understand who are the people who are working in this area, right? So I started off with a paper, but maybe my interest is more towards what are the research groups that are working in this particular area, right? So I can ask it this question of which are the major research groups working in similar areas. Create a table with the names, with the location of the group, the principal investigator, and its website. right? So this is a very interesting way of looking at the search itself. It's collating, it's actually getting me a very interesting synopsis of the particular area. What is the work going on? Who are the key people who are involved in working in this area? So maybe I can now use this information to perhaps get in touch with these people, right? And look at what is their upcoming research about, right? So this kind of gives me the pointer to be able to do that, right? It is allowing me to create this group, right? So this is the reverse lookup, which is perhaps a little bit more time consuming in a Google kind of an environment, right? So I can definitely do this. What else can I do? I think I talked about scope expansion earlier on, right? And we looked at keyword extraction. Let me reprint that list again, right? Oh, maybe there's something. What else can I do over here? Let's see. I can do some sentiment analysis, right? So I had already demonstrated the keyword extraction. So if we get into the sentiment analysis, right, let me ask about what was the public opinion about the Vaswani paper. So it gives me a general disclaimer saying that it's opinions, right? Right? So it kind of gives me that it's generally been a positive. It helps me understand that this paper has been generally well received, right? But has it received any press coverage, right? I can go ahead and ask that. Uh, uh, right, sentiment analysis is a much more difficult task, right, because it has to go through a lot of a lot of material in order to figure out the positive word biases and the negative word biases to figure out what is the overall sentiment of this, right? But a more specific question would be, what are the press releases covering the Vaswani paper? So this is an area where you start to see a limitation of the language itself, right? Uh, as the language evolves, definitely there'll be expansions in its capabilities, right? To be able to do a lot of reverse lookups, significantly more reverse lookups, right? This is a question that I can definitely ask Google. right? And you see that you will find a lot, if that is in the press, Google has a wider reach and is more up to date. So one of the limitations of large language models is that it is what, the model is pre-trained, right? Which means that, there is a cutoff date. A lot of what GPT 3.5 is trained on is probably dated around May or June of 2021, right? So you might not be able to get very current information, right? It gives you a summary of the entire body of work, right? But it's not a place where you would go for where you're if you're looking for current affairs. Uh, so earlier we had extracted a few keywords from the Vaswani paper, right? Let me reprint that again. Uh, uh, Let me also ask it to add a column with Wikipedia links. Right, so what you can see over here is what it is allowing us to do now is create, go deeper into the knowledge base, right? Go deeper into the and have a very focused dive into the knowledge base to extract out specific pieces of information that we want. uh, of course, since ChatGPT is trained on natural language, right, on documents like Wiki, and a lot of its knowledge base comes from Google patents, right, things like that. So it is able to process natural language, which by definition is very ambiguous, right? Having said that, code is can be checked by compilers, right? Code is something that has a very that is much more structured. It has a lot more well defined syntax and semantics, right? So when ChatGPT is trained on code, it can precisely understand algorithms, right? Which is why it is a great tool to be able to generate code snippets. Not only code snippets, it can actually generate significant amount of helpful code as well, right? But what it does not understand is perhaps some higher order concepts around, say, parallelization of the code, optimization of the code to run on multiple cores and things like that, right? But for day-to-day purposes, it can give you a significant leg up in terms of building something, right? So if I wanted to say the um, reprint the summary, the expanded summary of the Vaswani paper as a HTML file. Let's look at what's going on there. So it's putting out the paragraphs, right? Not only HTML code, you can use it to generate essentially code in Python, in JavaScript, in Java, even if you wanted to create a batch file to change the extensions of your file names or manipulate some files in your file system, you can use it to do that, right? It's got a little copy button, so I'm just going to copy that over and probably put it into a notepad. And so you get a HTML file out of that, right? What if I want to modify the HTML file with Wikipedia links to the computer science concepts? We had created that list earlier on. So you're not only seeing the header information come up, right, like previously. So now you're seeing that it is already starting to embed, it had already identified which were the keywords that were being used in, what were the keywords that were being used in this particular paper, right? And it can create, it is inserting links into it. Right, so I can just copy this over. And see that all these pages have links now, right? These are links that are connected to respective Wikipedia pages. So you have now created a summary paper which has, which is kind of your knowledge base, right? Which is, what this summary paper contains is up to you. Like what information you have aggregated is completely up to you. But you now have this capability to create this knowledge base really quickly. Right? So this is where the link embedding comes on. And finally, this is a really cool feature of ChatGPT that at the end of the day, what you can do is you can go ahead and say list all the prompts from this session. So this kind of, rather than having a search history, right? This is a mechanism which allows you to trace a chain of thought, right? As you are evolving, as you are diving deeper into a particular topic, right? This allows you to understand it much, much better. So not only can you create this list of prompts, you can actually create this list of prompts and then save it as essentially what you would do with a macro, right? And reuse that entire prompt at a later point, right? So that is essentially what prompt engineering is all about, right? So I wanted to cover this part primarily from the perspective of saying that if you are doing research, right, where you are starting off a new research area, or you want to get an overview of how to get started in a particular area, you can use ChatGPT as a mechanism to understand that area in a very short period of time, right? But in many cases, you are doing that research for innovation, for solving a particular problem, right? And in that case, the challenges may be a little different. The kind of questions that you want to ask ChatGPT may be slightly different, right? So what kind of questions would you want to ask, right? So when you are talking about innovation, you fundamentally think that any company that is out there today, right, it is solving a fundamental problem. It is solving somebody's need, whether it is Amazon trying to provide you an e-commerce service, right? Whether it is Google who's trying to give you a search service, right? Whether it is Facebook, which is a social media service, right? All of them are solving a particular problem, right? So if you are an entrepreneur and you are thinking about how do I get into entrepreneurship, how am I going to use ChatGPT, right? Well, there's good news. It can do it's got a lot of cool features that can be used, right? For example, if you are thinking about setting up a company, right, one of the first things that you would do is try and understand what is the context in which your company will operate, right? What is it that you will build? Who will you sell your products to, right? How will you go about and sell those products? And essentially, we have covered this in one of our previous sessions in something called the business model canvas, right? And in the business model canvas, we kept the product's value proposition at the very center, looked at what are the customer segments that product caters to, right? How do you build the customer relationships to, who are the specific contacts whom we will go and sell? What details do you have in order to connect to your customers, right? Which channels will you use to reach out to your potential customers, and potentially how much can you sell your products, right? At the same time, you have to look at how will you build your product? What is your supply chain looking like? Who are the key resources and what are the key activities that are helping you to build those products? And what is the cost incurred in building those products, right? So overall, you have a profitable business when the cost structure is much lesser than the revenue stream. The same model can be typically applied in thinking about a new business as well, right? So for example, if I were to use ChatGPT, right? So let me ask it a very generic question of what are common, say, home automation products? Or let me say list common home automation products. Right, so it's listed out quite a few, right? So it's talked about smart plugs and I come from a background in IoT, so I'm very interested in this particular area. It's talking about smart plugs, and I'm interested in that, right? So let me ask it to create a custom. Let's consider smart plugs. Right. Can I ask it to create a customer persona for a smart plug buyer in, let's say, Kolkata? right? Already you see that it started off in a good footing. It's actually identified a good customer persona. Typically, it's giving me a lot of details. It's starting to shape up that persona, and it is for me to decide, right, whether this is the right, if this is the right kind of person who will buy my product, right? So I have their demographic information, I have their background, right? Why is that person interested in buying that smart plug, right? So if this is the person who would typically buy my smart plug, right? I can ask it a question of market segmentation, saying how many mm, people in Kolkata would fit the above persona. So we let it crunch the numbers. We let it understand what is the total population and everything. And it starts to spew out some numbers, which it is up to you to judge whether these numbers are reasonable, whether the rationale that is being used for this calculation is fitting into your scheme of things. So they're estimating about 4.45 million people who would fall within this age range. Let me ask it for a target market size for smart plugs in Kolkata. Smart, let's say Aniruddha's persona. So it's given me a ballpark number. This may not be the absolute accurate number, but it's given me a ballpark number, right? So if I were to target to this particular segment, right, I need to understand who the competition is, right? Which companies sell smart plugs So maybe I want this information as a table. Right? So if these are the competitors who are selling this product out there, what are they selling it at, right? So this kind of gives me a sense of what the market. This kind of gives me a sense of what the market is doing, right? What is the typical selling price of the product in the market itself, and what would be a viable product range, right? So let me now that this tells me how many products I can potentially sell, or what is, who are the competitors in the market. Let me look at it from the other side, right? What is the bill of materials for making a smart plug? So I'm trying to get a sense of what are the key components that are required. Right? Table. Let me put that in a table with their prices and major vendors. So I've not started making this product yet. I'm interested in making this product. I am getting a sense of what my market size is, how many can I potentially, what is the potential market size for this particular product, what percentage of that market I can target, right? What is the competition price coming up like? So what would be the cost of manufacturing let's say add another at 20% as R&D costs. So very quickly, without getting into the nitty-gritties, right, you can get a sense of what is the pricing coming up to. Right, so I know that typically in the market, there are the products that are available in the market, they are selling for anywhere between 1,000 rupees to 1,200 to 1,300 rupees. But my initial cost itself is perhaps coming up to 1,270, right? Which means that in this business, unless I am building this in significant volumes to be able to reduce my input costs significantly, right? Just by assembling the components together, this may not be a viable business. This may not be a viable business model, right? But it also gives me pointers saying that if I find out a mechanism to buy in enough volume so that the economies of scale start to kick in, then I can probably end up being able to manufacture this product at anywhere between 500 to 600 rupees, right? Or even lower, right? Which will leave me enough of a margin to make up my R&D costs from the target segment that is available, right? So that's how you can use ChatGPT again to identify vendors, to identify suppliers, right? If I, for example, if I wanted to make this smart plug and I wanted to look at, I needed to make some molds and all, right? Who are list So I might, if I'm lucky, I might be able to get some really good connects, right? But it is, since the information is always going to be dated in this large language models, right? It's at least giving me a pointers in terms of where to search for this kind of information. So it's given me a few pointers in terms of where to connect next. Right? If I wanted to get into the specifics in terms of look at what are my pricing options that are available, right? I can also go in and start digging deeper in terms of specific modules. So it allows me to kind of compare and contrast between what are the options that are available to look at, right? And look at it from a brainstorming perspective, right? It's given you a few options. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is a list to get started with, right? And you can always dig in deeper once you feel that the current list is not sufficient to meet your requirements, right? So for example, I wanted to create a table with their sales contact. Uh, So if the information is not available, it will let you know, right? And if the information is available, it might be able to list out some of these contacts as well, right? But of course, it comes under the guidelines of privacy protected information, right? But if it's a public information, then it may be able to access it, right? So I think overall that kind of brings me to the towards the end of my discussion, right? Before I close, however, I would definitely want to point out to the risks that are associated with using a platform like ChatGPT, because inherently the data, a snapshot of publicly available information was collated. It was filtered through, in many cases, it was humans who filtered them, right? Looking, and that kind of introduces our own biases depending on where exactly in the world it was filtered, right? Certain communities are more proactive in terms of writing material, putting content out there, right? So they tend to be overrepresented in the training data set. Some communities may not be sharing as much information publicly, right? Which means that they will tend to be underrepresented, right? So you are going to see the training bias based on the information, that has been, that the data set is, that the model is trained on, right? In some of the examples that we discussed today, right, we saw that there is a traceability issue, right? In many cases, it is creating information, it is giving you a top level view, but the backlinks that are being created, when you are asking it for references to, so it is unable to provide that kind of reference information. So you definitely cannot use ChatGPT as a primary source of information. ChatGPT is meant to be used very differently. It is meant to be used as a precursory source of information, right? And the third major issue is that it is dated information as of when the model was trained, right? Training these large language models is resource intensive. It takes a lot of computational power to be able to create these data sets which are built over trillions of nodes, right? So it is an exhaustive, computationally intensive model, and therefore there are environmental implications based on training these large models, right? So it should be used with that disclaimer, right? Having said that, I will now hand over the session to Mr. Vinod Shankar, who's here, right? He's the CEO of the Dayanand Sagar Atal Incubation Center. I'll let him introduce the facilities that are available for incubation at Dayanand Sagar, right? And any of you who are thinking about creating a company of your own, who are thinking about how do you channelize your entrepreneurial spirit into an organization, right? I would strongly recommend you to get in touch with the excellent team at Dayanand Sagar, who have excellent facilities available for usage both locally and virtually. Over to you, Vinod sir.
Thank you for those kind words, Atanu sir. It was an excellent session on ChatGPT today. So we have all seen that how life has evolved from libraries, and it has gone to Google, and now today we are all using ChatGPT, which is a very powerful tool to build a business. In fact, I personally have used ChatGPT for doing some sales pitches and all. In fact, I have built a huge database of CSR heads in Bangalore, and then I have generated almost 70 lakhs worth of revenue using ChatGPT. So it may not build you the entire database from scratch, but you have to put some effort. For example, if someone is looking at HR heads in Bangalore, so you just ask list the HR heads in Bangalore, and you will actually get a list of HR heads in Bangalore. Although it may not give you email IDs and phone numbers, you may go to LinkedIn, connect with them, and from there your sales process starts. So that way it's a very powerful tool. So whether it is to build your database or whether it is to do with your business model canvas, identifying your competitors, building customer segments, so ChatGPT can go a long way in helping in your business. So a great session. We thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you so much for that. And whoever is interested in the incubation can get in touch with us. We offer physical incubation and virtual incubation as well. So a lot of handholding will be done in the form of mentoring and then seed funding support. And we also give a lot of software credits. And for those of you who want to work from our office space, it's always open 24/7. So with that, I would like to end my remarks here and hand over to Atanu for his closing remarks. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Vinod sir. If there are any questions in the group, I definitely want to take them. We discussed a number of areas. We looked at being able to redirect, write your queries. I mean, of course, ChatGPT does a lot of sentence completions. It does a lot of report completions. But today, what we were exploring was, different areas where we do not think of using ChatGPT as much. But there is a knowledge creation capability that is built into it, right? So if there are no further questions, we will close today's session here. Thank you all for joining in. It's been wonderful to have all of you here today. Thank you.